You did not count down all the way. And I was expecting you to not count down all the way.
Like, I never count down. You're not supposed to count down. What?
Well, no, you did like 5, 4, 3, and then you just went. Because normally you do 5, 4, 3, and then there's actually the 2. Maybe you did. It just felt.
No, because it takes a while for it to fade.
That's
That's how I usually do it. Because too many people will start right at 1 instead of then pausing for another second. So to me,
that's good to know.
1 is.
Because I think I always tried to do a beat pause, but I'm not sure I manage it. Well, but I did also. I
try and build it in for you.
A fade transition.
Well,
which
yeah.
is different. Not a smash cut.
Well, yeah, because
so classy.
Well, we try. Yeah, I mean, contrary to some of our shows, yes.
I'm sorry. What?
Oh my goodness.
I watched a portion, like a very small portion of the Dan's entirely improvised RPG, and I just caught the line of like, your intelligence is 100, so I'm setting your dexterity at 2, and I'm like, you are a treasure, Dan Poslins.
Yeah. They insisted on calling it Untitled GeekSpaceTV one-shot. Insisted on it. Like, I mean,
that makes sense.
Like, Marcus was going to be heartbroken if we didn't call it that. Like, legit, I think he was going to be heartbroken if we didn't call it that. So, yeah, there you go. That's why it's called that.
I think it's an appropriate title.
It is an appropriate title. That I will agree.
Whether it is good or not is up for debate, but it is appropriate.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
If you're new here or returning and you're not quite sure why you're here, welcome to GeekSpaceTV. We're a non-profit broadcasting studio in the Seattle area with a mission to promote and increase diversity and inclusion within gaming and geek spaces. And today, during this 2-ish hour segment, we present to you Behind the Screens, kind of our roundtable discussion where I, the expert, teach Anna, the complete novice, how to be the best GM that has ever GM'd.
That reminds me, I need to get some info from you on that panel proposition about GMing veterans that we might both be on.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Cool. Yeah,
I have to remember to get that.
You are such a novice.
That legit just reminded me about that. So, yeah, no, I mean, I'm total noob.
Totes noob. Never done this before.
No.
But mostly the purpose of this is to have a conversation about kind of different topics, different things to think about, to challenge and prompt people or push people into hopefully feeling more confident in their GMing and actually being able to translate that into better performance, better games, both for performance and also at home. Like, I kind of want to delineate, like, I think one of the things that people don't always take into account is there is actually a pretty significant difference between those two things, and it is I will try and address when I'm talking about something that's intended for a performance as opposed to a home game. And some of that's actually going to be coming up kind of today, because today's lesson plan involves talking about planning and balancing things on the fly, kind of and this is a pretty big topic, so we may not cover all aspects of it, or maybe we'll get through it way faster than I anticipated. My lesson plan is 3 bullet points, so...
So what you're saying is you're going to improvise...
Today's lesson on improvising.
Okay. No, that's good. I like it.
I have guidelines.
I approve.
I have guidelines. But basically, what are things that you can do...
Also known as pirate rules.
Yes. Yeah. Spirate rules, perhaps. But those would be spied lines. Spaguidelines. It's like spaghetti, but different.
Like, are spied lines guidelines for spies, or...
Guidelines on the side?
Anyway.
Okay.
Please cool down, tea. I need your caffeine.
Aww. You need to, like, pour it into a different mug, let it cool down, or, like, into
I don't have a different mug.
Could you put it in a cup?
I could, but it might melt it, because all we have are plastic cups,
That's
because
fair.
we have a cement floor, and... you've met the cast.
I am of this cast. You have literally seen me on this show drop a cupcake. It flew out of my hand. Yeah. So this is a solid choice to have plastic cups. I'm not saying this was a bad idea.
I might have made reference to that in this week's announcements.
Me dropping a cupcake?
No, you throwing the cupcake, I think is what I said.
It fell out of my hand of its own volition. There is a gift to prove it.
Oh, goodness.
So yes,
anyway,
hello everybody. I will be talking about, we will be talking about, essentially, we've talked a little bit, I believe, about, like, how do you set up encounters, like, how do you plan for a session? This is, what do you do when you're sitting there at the table and shit goes down? Because that is something that you have to deal with. Because, like, I believe they say in the military, no plan survives first contact with the players?
I think they say enemy, but yeah.
I do not want to refer to my players ever as the enemy.
Why not?
No.
Oh, we don't want to cover that today?
Oh, we can.
Sorry,
That's
I'm looking
probably
for
actually a
the
really
tweet
good
to
thing.
retweet it.
There was a tweet that I really enjoyed that someone was. Okay, so some of the show is me just responding with feelings to tweets. So one of them, there was someone who tweeted, it was like, my GM aesthetic is laughing maniacally at the players while secretly like stacking the deck in their favor, and I'm very much one of those. I'm like, ha ha ha, I'm going to murder you, but actually secretly I'm like, but I'm not.
Yeah.
But I'm not, because it's part of the performance. It's the theater.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Did you
still
retweet it?
No, I'm trying to find it. Hang on. I'm just going to search for GeekSpace.
That's fine.
GeekSpace. Hey, kids, if you're not already following us on Twitter, please do. That's it. That's the sales pitch.
Twitch.tv/GeekSpaceTV.
No,
You can twitter.com/GeekSpaceTV.
Yeah, that's what I was...
Please follow us on all the various social medias. Twitter is a really good place to get notifications on when we're going live, because we will always tweet that we have gone live. You can also, if you are following us here on Twitch, consider going up to the notifications and click in that little bell icon or the on button. That'll give you push notifications for when we go live. So hello, let's introduce ourselves briefly. They may all know who we are, but just in case, who are you? Why are you here?
I'm Anna Geeks. I am formerly a full-time broadcaster, now part-time Twitch broadcaster.
Apparently that's where the button is. The bell is somewhere up here. Keep going.
Oh, I'm like, what bell? Claudia's not here? What? Oh, that bell. Sorry. Formerly full-time Twitch broadcaster, still a partner, now part-time broadcaster, because I spend all of my waking hours running this studio.
Sometimes your non-waking hours too.
That's actually true. That is legitimately true. Yeah, I've been waking up at 5:30 a lot lately.
That is not a good thing.
It's really
and
not.
I'm the one who's jet lagged from your.
I'm not a morning person.
No.
But yeah,
on the plus side,
I do run this fine nonprofit streaming broadcasting studio. It's great. It's good. It's awesome.
You're our magnanimous leader.
Yeah. I'm also, like, as Fire Raven points out, I'm super salty today, and it's nothing to do with this fine broadcast or show or any of that stuff. So, yeah.
It's purely because your tea is too warm to be drunk.
I wish. I wish my problems were so simple and easily fixed as an ice cube.
Yeah, I don't know why this isn't the thing that you've tried yet.
I don't have any ice cubes.
Well, you have, like, medium tepid water. That would help. Anyway, my name is Random Tuesday. You can find me on the internet as Random Tuesday. And then later tonight, I will be GMing a show called Leviathan Distant Stars. I'm very excited. I planned things. Literally, I believe most of what is written for today involves emotional fallout and then several points. Because stuff's been happening. Things are gonna go down. So, you can find me in various places on the internet, and theoretically, I'm an expert at this. So.
No theoretically about it.
I'm an expert at this. I have lots of experience.
It's true.
Can measure them in hours. So, how was I going to start? I'm just going to sit here and stare at you for a minute.
Do we think we're going to be able to avoid that conversation?
Which one?
That one.
Probably not, but
right.
I want to bring it up as part of a larger context because
Okay,
it's part of what it reminded me that this is what I wanted to talk about today, but also it was written in my notes from last time because the last time we debriefed a session, and this is that you ran called Spikadelic.
Yep.
And that show is very, very strongly on the collaborative storytelling side of the RPG spectrum and involved a significant amount on your end for various reasons, generating things on the fly. And in the case of this particular game, kind of coming up with rules on the fly too. And so we're going to kind of talk about some of the spectrum of what it looks like. I will reference Dungeons and Dragons a lot because it is a touchstone that a lot of people know about, but I also want to bring in other RPG systems and how they can handle things. So I'm going to kind of bring up some of the things which people were mentioning about concepts of fudging dice rolls, and that is a portion of what I view as the balancing on the fly. So they're kind of, how dare you? They're kind
sorry, I just
two main.
It's moved over.
Oh yeah, I shifted this way more. I can
No, it's fine. I'm just
uncenter.
zoom in a little. And adjust.
It's my face.
Sorry, I forgot that it would do that for the main view as well. But hey, that gives me an opportunity to come back in without it being zoomed in on my boobs.
Okay. Oh, there we go. And we're back.
Sorry, I totally forgot that when I do that,
Yeah.
it's going to do it for there too. I am tired. I have a little bit of a migraine. And as mentioned before, I am super salty today.
It's all good. I have a beautiful face, perfect for framing. Or convicting me of crimes I didn't commit. Anyway, yesterday, this is entirely on topic, but I went to a friend's murder mystery birthday party and we did one of those like dinner ones, and we've done a bunch of them, and a lot of them are very racist and sexist. But this one was not, and it was very nice. They had a lesbian couple in it.
That's awesome.
I was like, this is great. This is the future. Not horribly racist things. Anyway, unrelated side note. I felt a need to share this because I had strong feelings about it.
That's fair. That is reasonable.
So there are kind of two components that I'm going to break this down to. We've got planning on the fly, which is essentially generating story elements, and that kind of, we'll start with that, and that's a pretty big span. And then the other one is balancing on the fly, which is doing things that involve adjusting your difficulty of the game, and that one's going to be a little bit more system specific as opposed to general, because a lot of it is the system that you're running will determine some of the ways that you can balance it on the fly. And so I'll talk about sort of general tactics as well as some specific ones for systems that I'm familiar with, and that would be a great place for people to share ones that they're familiar with. The future of it was the future of dinner mysteries. 100% recommend it.
Sorry, trying to get us background audio.
Oh, fancy. But the silence is wonderful. So I'm going to move my notes slightly closer to me, my whole concept. So planning on the fly. Let's start with that because that is maybe slightly less related to Twitter discussions. So when you're planning on the fly, that can look like a few different things. You can have some of that be the concept of how do you react to what players have done, and some of that is comes from places of, oh my god, I've run out of stuff that I've planned for, and silence of the lamps. Just the hum, the gentle hum of static. And the buzzing of lights. Except we have LED lights, so they don't buzz at all, which is really nice. Thank you, Anna.
Love.
Pet peeve, buzzing lights. So, reacting to players, planning things when you were unprepared, planning things that when you've run out of content or material. So in terms of the reacting to player side, yes, and let's talk about this because I have both positive and negative feelings towards the concept of yes and as an improviser. So for those of you who don't know what yes and is frequently painted as or presented as a core concept within improvised theater. And improvised theater shares a lot of traits and skill sets with telling RPGs. It's part of the reason why I love so many of my players, because so many of them are improvised theater performers. In fact, when I ran Shadowrun Corporate Sins, everyone had some degree of improv theater experience, and that was like the first time I was like, oh my god, improvisers actually make pretty good players. But yes and is a concept that is basically whenever someone says something, you should say yes, and then you should add a detail to it. And at its core, that is a really good beginner's concept, but it is a beginner's concept. And it isn't 100% applicable to dungeons or to RPGs. Because sometimes, as a GM, you should be able to, and you should, say no. At its core. Because the GM is often, in a game, the arbiter of the rules, as opposed to... some people are like the arbiter... And by arbiter, I mean the person... They're like the Supreme Court of the rules. Like, they basically sit there and make decisions about whether or not, like, the player's actions are within the rules, which are the Constitution, you know. And there's... because
they're the director of the play.
Yeah. Because fundamentally people's actions are subjective, and in many ways the rules are frequently subjective. And so if you have a game with a GM, you have given them the power to say yes or no. Your actions fit within the rules, your actions don't fit within the rules, and if they do, here's how, and if they don't, here's why. And so yes and supposes that there is no... Yes and can get to a point where you are not playing with rules, and that's okay too. But that's a different storytelling. That's a different kind of game, a different kind of storytelling, a different experience. And Paladin brings up the example, I use my bow to destroy a tank. That is a moment where you may not want to say yes and. You might want to say something slightly different. Like, no. You shoot your bow at the tank and it doesn't do anything. Or you break your bow. Or whatever it is. Like, there's opportunities to build on what the players have done without necessarily shutting them down, but it is within your right as a GM to say no. And it's hard. That's a thing that I had to learn.
Really quick, everyone let me know if you can hear Sirenscape and it is too loud or too quiet or whatever. Just feel free to let me know, or one of the mods in the mod chat. I can see that right now, so just let me know. I just don't want it to be distracting. We're on a ship's bridge right now.
Ooh.
I thought about spaceport, but that was probably going to sound too busy.
Yeah.
So.
If this is the one that
Sounds
I think
good.
it is, it may
Awesome.
eventually get the weird Morse code beeping.
Okay, well, let us know and I'll stop it.
So, Thornton Trooper, no? Terror Trooper. Wow, misread that name. Thank you for using the @.
The font is tricky.
Yeah. Again, as a reminder, if you would like to address a question directly to us that we see, using @Anna, @Lauren, or @GeekSpaceTV, or even just using those words without having to @them, will highlight the text for us so we can see it more easily.
Yep.
And that's a really good question about improvising versus planning, which I'm probably going to write down and address a little bit later on. Because I have thoughts. Planning versus improv. Bam. Okay, written it down.
There's all manner of weird stuff happening in this.
Yeah, this is the bridge one.
All right.
It's fine.
Fine.
I use
weird
it a
bridge.
lot.
I'm
got
just used to Federation starships. That's all. It's fine.
Yeah, so there's a lot of
Now
good...
watch as I burn myself.
There's a lot of good responses. No? Right temperature?
No, it's... Yeah. I can start drinking my tea.
There's a lot of potential responses to a player saying something that you as the GM, the person running the game, and I use the term GM, but often systems refer to it as different things like facilitator or narrator or MC, and they often have MC. Monster Hearts uses it. MC, like Master of Ceremonies. I sort of assume that's where it came from. It's just literally the MC. And I think people use different terms because they want to kind of reframe the way people might think about that role.
Yeah.
And they do come with different amounts of power and different ways that they influence the game depending on the system. But I'm going to stick with GM because it's fairly generic. So there's a lot of options, like the good example of Matt Mercer, you can certainly try. I definitely use the you can try. Sal points out the, like, how does it break the tank? Like, posing questions to your players is always a good potential option. Like, okay, how does that work? What do you do? That's always one of my favorite ones is, what do you do? How do you do it? And so they're like, well, I get my explosive pad, and I'm like, oh, that's right, you had that whole thing of C4, and then I strap it to the bow, and I'm like, okay, this may not work super well, but I'm going with you. And so you kind of put some of the agency in the player's hand before you can give a full yes or no answer. Let's stop and think about the consequences of what you've just said. I often never want my players to stop and think about the consequences.
Why
I want
would
them
you
to get
that?
blindsided by
Honestly,
the consequences.
why would you ever want that?
Because if they stop and think, they might not do
why
it.
would you ever want them to stop and think about the consequences of their actions?
Because
No.
if they stop, then they won't do the thing, and I won't get to give them consequences.
It's a far better story if they charge into danger.
Excellent
haplessly.
example. If I had been like, Claudia, let's stop and think about what you just said when Kika sneaks onto the ship by herself, then she would never have snuck onto the ship by herself, and she would never have gotten kidnapped, and I wouldn't have been able to laugh about it.
And we would not still be marveling at the wonder that there's only supposed to be one person in engineering.
Yeah. Or that you can reset a ship with 340 ohms.
You know, I'm just that's a
But that's fair. If that works for you, again, I really do want to point out.
parsecs issue is all I'm saying.
I have personal opinions on how things are run, but there is fundamentally no wrong way to run an RPG, and that's, I think, a really important thing for people to remember, is that these are suggestions; they are not rules. And if you want to, like, if that works for you at your table, like, let's think about like what the consequences of this action would be, because the way you're phrasing it might be as a collaborative conversation about the outcome of someone's action. Like, that's a really cool way of doing it. Because you might be like, okay, well, let's think about what would happen. You might find having that conversation as a group works better for you, because you don't want to have to make all the decisions yourself. Totally legit.
Oh, there's the Morse code.
I would suggest Nebula as a
I was thinking of going right for the space station.
Oh, that's fine. That's good too. Nebula is one of the other default ones that I use, and it's very mellow.
I mean, we can just turn off the whatever the heck that is. If we know.
It's the main sound. It's in the music.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
I know. It's really annoying. It's not a beeping. It's in the actual music. So, the storyteller. That's another term for the GM. Unfortunately, like, what is this one?
This is Abandoned Space Station.
Ooh, that's a good one too. Oh, thank you, Sal. My hair is fading in a very strange way as it continues to do so.
Someday I'll get a method for this now. Probably when we hire a board operator.
That's fair. Or someday we'll like get non-copyrighted music to have as background music during shows. It's doable. I'm sorry. Okay, so yes, and I think it was a little bit earlier up, but Trooper was talking a little bit about there are problems with the yes and concept, and the problems with an improv are not necessarily the same as the problems with an RPGs. It's a very good baseline place to start in terms of giving your players agency and control in what happens, but remembering that as the GM you have the ability to say no, and that you should exercise that ability when it makes sense to exercise it. So one of the alternatives that I will use will be no, but like, no, you can't do that, but you could try this instead. That's a related action. And that's also a valid strategy. But in either of those cases, the and is really, and the but is really the important piece, because that's the piece that you're coming up with. The player has made an offer, and you now need to react to it in some way. And sometimes you planned for that. More often than not, I find that you have not planned for it. That players will do things...
I like how she looks at me when she says, "You have not planned for it."
You were sitting here!
I think this one might be really loud. Yeah, this one's really, really loud.
quieter now. Maybe.
All right. That's good.
Success.
Hopefully. Sorry.
Butts
I don't
are
know why
important.
just changing.
No. I look at you, yes, because you did not plan for this. Valid question. Did you plan for us to strangle people with our thighs? In Spikadelic.
Well, I mean, it's psychedelic. It's kind of a given.
Yeah. But you probably
But I
didn't
mean,
write
no.
it down in your notes. You wouldn't
No.
have written down strangles with thighs.
No, but, it's kind of an expected thing.
It's a trope.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
It's a solid trope. She has power on the couch. It's pretty cool. The soundboard moves.
Yeah. This was something that I did Friday night? No. Wednesday night, last Wednesday, because we only had 3 players. I was going to be the 4th, but, or I was setting myself up to potentially be the 4th, but I didn't get everything done in enough time to do that. So we went with 3 and it worked out great. So no regrets there. But what I did is I made it so that the soundboard can move, so that when I do eventually end up GMing a show, Star Trek, the mixing board, the audio will be right next to me, as will the stream deck and stuff like that. So,
Or in situations where other people might need to, / for shows like this. It is very helpful.
Yep.
It's shiny. Are you unseelie or sealy?
Huh?
So it's an unrelated but important question. What fairy court are you part of?
I don't know.
Fair. Fair. Okay. So
I'm like Captain America right now.
you didn't get that reference. Fairy court.
I don't
That's fine.
understand that reference.
That's reasonable. So,
Partially because I'm freaking old. Yeah.
not knowing what fairy courts are, being old is not an excuse for that.
I know the concept of a
Yeah.
fairy court, but I have no idea what you're referencing.
Oh,
Otherwise.
someone just asked the question. Sealy
That was
or
fair,
unsealy.
folks. Oh, yeah, I know. I don't know what Sealy or unsealy means.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's
I
fine.
like the dark versus the light.
Oh,
It's
alright.
like Titania and Oberon, depending on your canon stories.
Okay.
It's fine. It's unrelated.
Neither.
Reasonable.
It's like asking Jedi or Sith. No thanks. It's a false dichotomy, is all I'm saying. I don't know. We'll see. All I'm saying is it's false dichotomy.
Okay. Well
Getting
then,
really loud. It's fine.
we can turn it down over there.
I could, but I'd have to go over there.
Oh,
For
that's
that.
fair.
And I have the mixer right here to do it.
Yeah. No, you do you. So, planning on the fly. When your players do something that you did not prepare for. There's a lot of different strategies, and I will talk about some of them, and you may find that different ones work for you depending on who you are as a person. But I kind of want, because you're here as well, and I've talked a lot now, you have GM'd before, so don't give me this bullshit that you're a noob. What are some things that you tend to do? Like if a player throws something at you that you didn't anticipate, and we can give an example of, let's start with kind of something similar. A player wants to take an action that maybe isn't described in the rules as written and wasn't something that you had planned for them to do. Like, so they're asking to do something that you weren't prepared for. What's kind of your thought process?
I think it's, for me, generally, we should back up a little bit and say that Twitch RPG shows, to me, are the kind of role-playing games I always wanted to play. Growing up, I've played RPGs since before most of you were born, and or at least before many of you. We always tried to like develop systems to encourage the role-playing, to really get into character, and Twitch by default like kind of bakes that in to doing RPGs. That is the type of RPG I've always wanted. So, to me, the answer to that is, what does it do for the story? Mm-hmm. Is it going to improve or detract from the story? And if it's going to improve it, then let's go with it. Figure out a way to incorporate it and make it work. And yes, and or no, but it. I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for.
No, I think that's
But
I'm not
that's how I
looking for
feel about it.
specific
Yeah.
answers.
I think that the rules are guidelines. That's what they're there for. They're there to help encourage and facilitate fun, and in the case of Twitch shows, help facilitate the storytelling.
I sort of subscribe to a similar feeling towards rules within RPG games, but there is to be clear, it is not wrong if you think the rules are not guidelines. Like, if you want to run a game where you stick as much as you can to the rules as written, obviously in many games you will encounter points where the rules do not cover a scenario that you are faced with, and you will need to make a decision. But you can still make those decisions within pretty tight constraints of what the rules do or do not allow. And in fact, to the point that you can say the rules don't tell me how to do this, so you can't. That is an entirely fair choice to make if it works for you, your players, and your game.
Yeah. It is very important to stress that it is all about your preference and those of the people you are playing with, and having that conversation with them.
Mm-hmm. And we've talked a little bit about in earlier episodes, like the sorts of conversations to have with players. So if you want to backtrack to those, there's stuff you can find. Mm-hmm. There's also a lot of good online resources. I have a video where I talk about it too. So here's a scenario. There was a thing that one of my players wanted to do, which was in Shadowrun to flip a van using the levitate spell. The levitate spell does not cover lifting vans, let alone flipping vans over. The levitate spell is terrible. I hate it. It's not well written. So I needed to make a decision in the moment whether or not I was going to let one mage in the party flip an entire van full of the people that they needed to fight with. And essentially the function that would have done if I'd let him get away with it as it was, is it would have ended the fight right there. And they needed, from my end, they needed to have a threat.
There it is.
And if that had been successful, there wouldn't have been... Thank you, Benny Bear, for the donation of $25.
Thank you so much.
Bear's got a bear.
Yeah. Very much appreciated, Benny. Thank you. I saw it come up ages ago, and now it's come up here. Like, yes.
It flashed up on
Thank
the
you.
screen, too.
Yeah.
So I want to... my thought process in this particular situation, whether it was the right decision or the wrong decision, it was the one that I made. And my decision was that I wasn't going to let it be entirely successful without it being very difficult.
Yeah.
Partially because I don't think the intention behind the spell was to allow players to do that. Partially I was concerned that it would set a precedent, that if that spell could perform those effects, it would consistently and constantly be performing those effects, which would tip the balance of power in my game significantly to a point that I wasn't comfortable with. And that also in that specific moment, they needed to have a threat. And so I didn't want to get rid of the threat through one action like that. I made that choice, and I still stand by it. Never gonna flip a van. So, but you will sometimes make decisions that maybe weren't the ideal one or weren't the best one, but you made them anyway. And that's a little bit more into, it kind of relates a little bit to the balancing as well. So yes, decision-making portion. When your players take an action that you don't expect, you kind of have to decide, if you're telling a story-based game, like you were saying, Anna, then it's going to be what's in service of the narrative. If you're telling a game where you're playing with more focused rules as written, then it will be your interpretation of the rules as written. That's when you're sitting there as the Supreme Court Justice of the rules, at saying, yes, this action is constitutional based on these rules, and this is the rule that applies.
Legendary documents.
Yes. Our text, the raw, determines that this is saying... and so you make that decision. And they're both right directions to go. But they are things that you should have talked a little bit about with your group, to the point. Paladin brought up an example of the players decide to join with the villain. that's a pretty dramatic decision that the players might make, and not necessarily one you can stop beyond being like the villain being like, don't work with me. But if the villain was just like, come, join me, and they're like, okay, then you can't be like, wait, actually don't do that. So this is an example of where the rest of your notes may no longer be relevant. Whatever else you've planned may be entirely irrelevant, and you get to sit there and make a decision about what's going to happen. And there's a couple of things there's a lot of things you could do. There's way more than a couple. One would simply be like, okay, well, the game is over now. We're going to come back and play with a new set of characters, and these characters will now be fighting your old characters.
Congratulations, you won Dungeons and Dragons. All right, moving on.
It might be that you change the tone of your campaign and you move forward and say, okay, well, now we're playing an evil campaign. I'm with Anna on this one. I would be like, cool. The game, this story is now ended. They are villains. They are now my NPCs, and then we would move into a different game, and maybe it would be in the same world, and you would suddenly be fighting the people that you decided to join with the villain.
Now, to be clear, a villain doesn't have to be evil.
Also true.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be. What was that saying? Good villains think they're right. Great villains are.
You can also have scenarios where the players chose for a different reason, and you need to have a conversation with them. Like, maybe they're like, oh, we're going to infiltrate them from the inside.
Yeah.
But it is probably still leaves you to a position of you're like, this I didn't plan for. These things that I have written are now irrelevant. This is where I tell you to kill your darlings. Other less tasteful ways of saying it include drown your babies.
Wow.
I have heard both of these phrases said by improvisers. I don't actually know if either of them are phrases that are regularly used.
I have heard kill your darlings, but I think it's mostly from you, so.
Yeah.
And other improv people around here.
Yeah.
I've not heard the other one.
I will not use that phrase anymore.
Burn your idols. That one I've heard. That's kind of different.
But the concept behind that is what you have planned is not precious. It is not something that is inherently better than what other people are putting in front of you on the table. It is not better than the offers that the players have made. Because this happens a lot in improv, where you'll be like, I have an idea for a scene, and you come out and you do the scene, and then the next person comes out and they do something entirely different, and you're like, that's not what I planned for. And you can stand there and try and awkwardly redirect the scene to the beautiful thing that you had, or you can throw that away and you can do something collaboratively. And in the case of a GM that is presented with players who do something entirely unexpected, that makes all of the rest of your planning irrelevant, and it happens, I would say take most of that, put it in the recycling. And like pull out some bits that you're like, this is still cool and relevant, but most of it's gone now, and that's okay.
The Great
Burn your
Monkey,
idols.
thank you very, very much. Great Monkey, no words of wisdom from the Great Monkey today, but here's a little riddle for one. How many clerics does it take to fix a light bulb? Only one. They cast Cure Light.
It's a really good spell.
That is a really...
I want that spell. The
That's a
only
pretty
use
good one.
fixing light bulbs.
Thank you very, very much, Great Monkey.
Thank you. So enjoy, kill your darlings, burn your idols, whatever concept. But it's
Yeah, burn your idols is something else.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's about
kill your darlings is probably the good one.
do not keep as precious the things that you have planned. Because when you do that, that is when you get into the place where you are not working with your players, but you are working against them. And it is not a place that I recommend being.
Or trying too hard to tell your own story instead of the players.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Do you want to take a moment and talk? This can segue us nicely into whether or not how player and GM interactions can. You were talking about like whether or not you should be collaborative or combative with players. We mentioned this briefly. I want to throw talking over to you.
Huh? Okay. Yeah, it's a collaborative thing.
What does that mean?
To me, the GM's role in particular with a show isn't to tell their own story. It's to facilitate the players' epic journeys. It is to collaborate with the players in telling their heroic stories, or anti-heroic, if that's your thing. It's not mine. Whatever. So, it's not... Somebody mentioned the GM being... not being op4 to the players, oppositional forces to the players, and that is something I very much agree with. Like, you are not actually opposing the players. I mean, you are... But in that sort of make them stronger sort of a way.
You're presenting challenges for them.
Yes.
You as you are not their
opposing.
opposition. You are presenting things that are in opposition, but
Yes,
you're also
thank you.
frequently presenting things that are for the players. You're, as much as you provide them the challenge, you provide them things to solve it with. Or for an enemy NPC, you also provide an NPC that's going to help them. And yes, Trooper's point is still technically correct. The darling is yeah. It's a gruesome analogy, but it sticks with you. Yeah. So you are not their oppositional force. At least in the vast majority of RPGs rules, they don't want to present you that way. There is opportunities
because otherwise
to play
it becomes
games
much
like that.
more of a strategy game and not a role-playing game.
Yeah, then it is fundamentally a different kind of game, where the balances are different, and that may be what you want, but especially on Twitch, doesn't tend to work as well. Yeah. Because people don't like watching people be actually unhappy with each other. And
Yeah, no, it doesn't really work very well.
No.
No.
So I think, with the very specific question, that's kind of a decision up to you, and is that a precedent? Like, I often think about, like, rule decisions that I make. They are kind of precedents. If you say yes to something now, you're going to struggle to say no to it later on. And so if you're like, yes, you can do this, you may want to think about the consequences that's going to have on your game, much like the yes, you can flip a van with levitate. What's that going to mean you can flip with levitate next? How is that going to destabilize my game?
I think here's why I'd allow that. Because it wouldn't do anything. It would basically, when their eyes are closed, it'd be bright, and it would be bright for them when their eyes are closed. But the only portion of your eye that's receiving light would only be receiving light when they're closed. So I would totally allow that. It would take their entire turn, and we'd move on.
Also fair. I would probably say and whereas my decision would be, like, you can't cast on a portion of an object.
Yeah.
So you could cast light on the person.
They also would get a saving
But they would get a saving throw.
to resist having a spell cast.
Like, you can't cast light on just the eraser on my... that's kind of a separate object. But I'd be like, well, they're all connected, so you can't cast on separate objects. You can cast it on their shirt, or their skin, or whatever it is. So, yeah, that would be my concept.
So yeah.
And those are two good examples of perfectly reasonable decisions to make for any game. Like, yours would be different than mine. I'd be like, no, but you could cast it on their whole body. And you would be like, yes. Ha ha ha! Didn't do what you wanted.
Yeah.
And those are very, like, that's why when I say the rules are inherently subjective, because we just had an example of two people that came up with completely different decisions of what to do given the same
Of how to
question.
foil the players.
Yeah. So I think that's to encourage you when you have to make those decisions for yourself. One, you might make different decisions in different moments with similar concepts. Two, none of your decisions are really fundamentally wrong unless it somehow makes the game an unenjoyable experience. Or, I guess, makes the game not the experience you want to have. arguably, if you're playing certain types of games, maybe fun
Enjoy
is
a strange word
isn't
for
the
some
term.
people.
Yeah, like it might be that you want a tense experience, whatever it is. Like but it makes the experience that you don't want to have, and it sets you up for something in the future. But I do say when you're making rule-based decisions, bear in mind the consequences that those might have for future rule-based decisions that you will need to make, because it can get out of hand. So it might seem like you're stifling the players in the moment, but you're also trying to like squash an escalation of power, or you're trying to do something more long term.
Because it always sucks to go back and be like, okay, I know I've allowed you to do this previously, but you can't do it anymore. We're like, that is always, because it messes with everybody's sense of continuity for the campaign. It messes with everybody's feeling of, no, this is a rule within the universe, and it no longer, you're saying it no longer is, but what about the stuff that my character remembers? Like, how does that affect that? And nobody likes that. So it's better to kind of err on the side of caution sometimes.
Which is what I think Jer's point is kind of a good one of, that it's more about the consistency of the rules necessarily than the exact decision or the way you're doing it.
Yeah.
Being predictable also helps your players think about what they're going to do, because if they're going to get kind of predictable actions from you, they're going to be like, oh, okay, this is the sorts of things that I'm working within. So the next piece, so we talked a little bit about kind of your instant reaction, like what are you doing in that very moment when the players are like, we're going to do a thing you didn't expect. But especially when you're playing a streamed game, you can't be like, okay guys, we're going to take a break and come next week when it's been 30 minutes into the evening and your players just went off the rails.
Yeah.
So what do you do? How do we create encounters on the fly?
With a lot of luck.
With some luck, some gumption, and a lot of tables.
Great aplomb.
All of your encounters are now plum-based.
No, not a great plum. Great aplomb. It's APLOMB, aplomb.
But what if I want a plum-based encounter?
Then you do that.
With a plum.
Just do it with great aplomb.
With faith and trust and pixie dust. Yeah, so related to the other point, saltiness, the saltiest healer. I'm sorry.
Formerly Misaki.
Oh, Misaki. Oh, cool. Hi. I didn't know that your name had changed.
They said it early at the beginning and it scrolled, but then I caught it. So.
I did not catch it. Thank you. The idea that is also an excellent way to say it is, I don't know the rule right now. This is what we're going to do, and I'm going to look it up later. And that is one of the things that and this is a point that I'm going to make, that is a different strategy that you might want to take in an online versus a offline game. And by online, I mean a streamed game with an audience versus a game for your group. Because I personally think you should not look up rules at the table in front of an audience. For a few reasons. One, mostly it breaks the entertainment. Like, you all drop out of character. You're sitting there, there's silence, there's just flipping of pages. This is not a good show. That people don't need to see the sausage made.
I think there are ways to mitigate it.
Yeah. And
that's, that's your feeling about it and your jam style and whatnot. But even, I agree with your point that it doesn't necessarily make a great streamed RPG. However, there are ways to mitigate it.
Yes,
so.
I do also agree with that. And it's something that's going to depend on your system. I would never be able to effectively look up a Shadowrun rule during a game because of the number of rule books and just the volume. But in Stars Without Number, it's one rule book. I can have players be role-playing, and I can look up a rule and confirm something. But typically in the moment, I would recommend making a decision to keep flow as opposed to pausing, looking up a rule, and then using that to make your decision. And that's variable. That is a personal preference, but it's something that I would recommend for a streamed game. For a home game, you can kind of go either way, and you can change it based on the moment. But there is a lot of power in the phrase of, I don't know the rule for that now. I'm going to do this. Like, this is how we're going to do it. We'll look it up later. And that's also a way to get around the potential of being like, well, we're going to have to do this or stop doing this thing. You're like, I don't know the rules for falling damage. We'll say it's 1d10 for every 3 meters.
In
I don't know,
D&D,
I think
it's 1d6, I think.
Yeah, it's something for X amount of distance.
Yeah.
But I don't know the exact numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 1d6 per 10 feet.
Which is roughly
3 meters.
3 meters.
But I think in Shadowrun it's something else. It was like X amount. It's,
Oh, yeah. You're thinking Shadowrun, I'm
Yeah.
thinking D&D. Got it.
It's
No,
deep.
that-
But like
not at all
that would be
surprising.
my response in stars
Yeah.
of that number. I'd be like, it's 1d10 for every 3 meters, but the first like 2 meters is free or something. Like I don't actually know the rules for falling damage. I'd make them up, and then if it came up a lot more, I'd probably look them up and write it down somewhere. And that's another example of like, I could say this phrase. It's actually a pretty good phrase in life. I don't know the answer, so I will look it up and tell you later. Get back to you. So encounters on the fly. That was our segue.
Stars Without Number, once again, being one of the most lethal systems.
It's
A d6 per meter.
Per meter. That's very.
Can you imagine falling 3 feet and taking 6 points of damage?
when you often have 1 at level 1?
Yeah.
Literally a 3. That doesn't make sense. A 1 meter fall could kill you. That
Well,
is
I mean, it
highly
depends on what you're
unlikely.
falling on, but it could. Maybe?
I mean, I can jump a meter without breaking my ankle.
Yeah. I don't like the odds on that. Anyway. Anyway.
Stars and Number is very lethal. I made a choice.
Yep.
Fixed most of it.
Yep.
So, did you shove someone out a 1 meter up window onto a fence? I guess it's the ground in space is always spike pits. That's how space
Always,
works.
yeah.
But
Incidentally, spike pits in space, still called spike pits.
yep,
Yeah.
spike pits. There's an extra silent SP at the front of it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I also got rid of chunky salsa rules. So a lot of my rule fudging is just out of laziness. Like, I didn't want to deal with chunky salsa.
Do I want to know?
Chunky salsa rules are the explosive rules from Shadowrun, where in Shadowrun you have an explosive and then your distance away from it drops the damage, but if it hits a wall, that bounces back. So if you drop an explosive in a very small room, it can hit the wall and just keep going back and forth. So like 1 square can receive a lot of damage, meaning you turn into chunky salsa.
Okay. That's fair. Yeah. Sure. So anyway. Yeah, always play a cat race and Stars Without Number.
Yeah. My entire race ability is just based off not taking falling damage.
Yep. Yep. I like it. In space. Yeah, I like it. So anyway.
But on the flip side, actual chunky salsa is delicious. So, what's your racial ability? Toe beans. I want to clarify that
like it.
Ludwig definitely had toe beans.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, right.
This.
So,
Caffeine.
making the actual encounters on the fly. There are a lot of things that you can do, and this piece is going to be a little bit specific to your system and obviously your story. But generally, there's like kind of broad categories for encounters, for like challenges that you can present for a player. There's social encounters. There's puzzle-y kind of encounters, and or kind of environmentally ones, and then there's fighting ones. And frequently, the line between those gets very blurred. You will find that social encounters can frequently devolve into fighting encounters, and vice versa, depending on your players.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's more of like, there are encounters with the environment, and then there are encounters with creatures. Maybe another way to put it. But there are different tools out there that can help you. I often find one of the strategies that I will use is the sort of transposing strategy, where I take something that I've planned and I change it. So I change the context of it. So I might have, I'm trying to think if there's an example of one of these that I did in a show recently. Not off the top of my head. But an example of the old shoot and flirt. Yeah.
Well, I was thinking, especially if there's a bard in the group.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, bards. They make everything complicated.
I sure do.
I love having bards, though. Bards are great. They're one of the best classes.
Yeah, they really are.
Where did my thought process go? I got distracted by bards.
I'm like, wait, what do I have to do? Because you're not hitting.
Oh. Why are you flirting with the person you just shot? Why are they accepting of it? These are all good questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
One of the tools that you can use is sort of the transposing, where you take something that you've planned and you just kind of jiggle it around and mess with the concept and some of the things in it and throw it somewhere else. So sometimes this will happen like in D&D, where I've got some sort of combat encounter, and I'm like, oh, here's the monsters that they're going to fight, and they're going to fight a bunch of these things, ha ha ha. And it's like an aquatic-based encounter, and then they're like, we're going to take the surface route, and I'm like, damn, my aquatic-based encounter is no longer super effective. But I can take, arguably, even those entire stat blocks and just be like, well, now, instead of them being murderous dolphins, they are murderous bears. Small bears. And you are fighting them in the woods. And so I can take... What?
I'm just picturing a troop of murderous tiny bears. They're big, they're fluffy, they're really angry. Sorry, continue.
Now they're murderous dolphins with legs. I didn't want to say wolves because they're not the same thing. I don't know.
And bears are?
They're Ewoks. Okay, maybe not the best idea, but you can take, and that's a good example of like, I've got to do this.
But not the worst.
fly.
Ewoks were awesome.
They were very murderous, and probably, I guess not cannibalistic, but consuming of humanoid flesh. I assume.
Yeah, well,
So so you can kind of take that and you can just plop it down in a different context, and it's easier to do in certain systems than other ones. And depending on how you've planned, like I often don't even necessarily change stat box significantly, so I might just go down to, okay, well, there's still going to be some sort of combat encounter with some sort of wild animal, and then I will find a relevant wild animal with the same challenge rating in D&D. And D&D can make doing a lot of those kind of plug-and-play encounters really easy because of the challenge ratings and the way they define things. What was something that you did or found yourself doing in Spikadelic when we went off the rails? Or when we went in a direction that you didn't necessarily anticipate? I'm going to use the example of the car fight. Was that something that you had planned for? Or would you have planned for?
Car fight generally, yes. I anticipate there to be a car chase in some way, shape, or form because one of the players, AJ, was a driver, and I generally feel, and I think you'll agree, that it's important to try to incorporate opportunities for each player to be in the spotlight or to be the one that is good at what is going on. And so, what I didn't anticipate was you not being good at driving, but we figured out a way around that. I don't even remember who came up with the idea or what exactly it was, but there was like some sort of drone or satellite signal GPS thing in your bike that let you take shorter routes, and that allowed you to still be a part of the combat when it commenced, even though you had no reason to be able to keep up otherwise. So yeah, there you go. That's what I got.
Related to I guess, kind of related to that in like a more like a Dungeons and Dragons setting where you do have these stat blocks or you have things like that. What are strategies that you've used when you don't have anything planned and you need to have some sort of encounter for the players?
I haven't DM'd in a very long time.
Okay.
So, I don't know. I don't remember. I was a terrible GM back then.
What do you think you did that wasn't good about it? Like, was that part of...
I was uncompromising.
Okay.
This is what made me a bad GM back then, is not understanding the concept that I wasn't an oppositional force, that it wasn't my job to punish the players for their actions or destroy them and make myself feel good. Like, these are not good things for a GM. That's what I did. I was a terrible GM. I have learned much.
There's also something to be said for your exposure to different concepts. Your tastes and your preferences also change. Like, you've had the opportunity to see what it's like when there's a different relationship.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time people don't know. Like, there's only one thing that they've seen, so it kind of that's their concept. Okay, so in terms of other things that you can do, you're so merciful to players now, just savage to everyone else. Oh, I don't think so.
Try very hard not to be savage to people.
Okay, so I talked about
only my enemies,
of
which there are thankfully few.
That's good. That's a good thing. You shall. They know who they are. Do they know who they are?
I'm pretty sure.
They know who they are.
I'm pretty sure everyone here knows who they are.
Where was I going at? I lost my train. I keep doing that today. I'm totally with it. Professional. Okay, so we got the kind of the plug and play, not the plug and play, I don't know, the transposing method, however you want to call it. Taking something that you've already got planned, reskinning it, and putting it in a different context. And that can actually work for a lot of different things, which is part of why again, a lot of this goes back to one of the ways that I plan is based on problems. Here is a challenge that the players will be faced with as opposed to here are potential solutions. Because when you've got something like a challenge, they're relatively favorite enemy.
My favorite enemy is apparently technical problems.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Yeah. I didn't know bards had favorite enemies, but I'll take it.
Maybe you have like one level in like assassin or ranger?
It would be ranger. Yeah. But yeah, favored terrain studio.
It's a good terrain. You spend a lot of time.
That's fair. I do. Yeah.
So the method of kind of transposing things can also work for different types of challenges, because like when you create something that's a little bit more modular, it's easier to take it out or put it back in or move it around. And so when I have a challenge, the challenges are kind of somewhat modular, and it might just be like, my challenge is like the doors in this place are locked, and that doesn't necessarily become untrue, but maybe they found a way around it that I just wasn't anticipating. And so the doors remain locked, and that might come up again at some other point. But if I planned some sort of elaborate puzzle and the players are like, because I anticipated they were going to try and unlock the door involving thievery, and then they like somehow seduced their way in because, I don't know, there was an owlbear guard and that went weird with a druid. So they somehow got in that direction and I wasn't anticipating, like, I can take that and I can use it later. Or maybe there is some other room that they will go to where I wasn't planning on having a locked door, but now that's the one that's locked, and that's the one that has this puzzle that goes with it. Adventurers really do have problems with doors. I was catching up on an episode, and it just like there was like a 20-minute debate about what they were going to do with this locked door, and I was just like, oh my god, this has been 20 minutes. Is this what happens in RPGs?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Owlbears are pretty lovely. They're like bears, but also owls.
I always wondered if their heads can swivel all the way around like an owl.
I assume so.
Probably.
I would say that if there was an owl bear in my campaign, it would. Because it's like an owl to like here. So
Yeah,
it's
I
got
know,
an owl
but-
neck.
But like it travels on all fours, so it's just, I don't know. It's just weird.
It has to look at the ground.
It's just
But
weird.
turn
Like it can.
this.
Yeah, no, it's strange. It's fine. Anyway.
Can it look up? No, I think I don't know if owls can tip their heads like this. Do they cock their heads to the side?
They must be able to tip it up. Like, I mean, because they fly, right? So anyway.
Yeah. And they don't just stare at the ground. They've got to be able
Yeah,
to look
right?
straight ahead.
Yeah. Let's ask Strix.
Yeah, Strix would actually probably know.
I know, right?
I really want to go look up how owl necks work.
Yep.
Owl bears' heads are static; their bodies rotate. How would that help you? That'd be way less useful.
I don't know. Anyway.
Okay. But yes, the transposing and reskinning can be helpful. Or maybe you had a puzzle that it's no longer for a door, it's for some other sort of lock, or maybe it's not part of a dungeon, it's part of a castle. Like, there are often, one of the things that I will use is just because the players take a different route doesn't mean that all of the challenges go away. And some of that's because I don't think that facing no challenges is as entertaining or as fun. Like, if they're like, we found this way around and there's clearly no traps here, and I'm like, well, there's just different traps there. So often I will decide that, like, they have to get in somewhere, and then I'll just have a bunch of traps, and then I'll just plug in traps that I might want them to encounter. And I'll normally have more than I might want them to actually face. How to make owl bears do yoga.
Yeah. You detect, no doubt. Oh, all right. Sorry.
So that's one of the things that planning by problem can help with. And that's helpful if you already have some material, and then you can plan. And then there's this sort of the place that you can run into where you're like, well, I've run out. And out of stuff. You moved through this a lot faster than I anticipated. And that was a little bit harder, because you don't have anything. You haven't necessarily planned beyond that story point. And sometimes, especially in a home game, that's the point where you can just say, I'm done. Like, that's everything that I had planned. We're going to come back next week, even if it cuts it short. It can be a little trickier, I should say, to do when you were in a streamed game. Because if I hit 8 o'clock on a 7 p.m. start game, when our game normally wraps at 10, that doesn't look great. And Anna would probably be a little mad at me if I was like, we're going to wrap this game here because I ran out of material. So there's a few things you can do. One is having a direction where you want things to go. And that does mean you need to have planned something. And it can be a small seed to a detailed outline. But it's an idea of what are some of the next places they might go to. Because then if the players don't give you somewhere, then you can give the players somewhere. But often this is coming because, not often. There's kind of two scenarios where you end up here. It's the players go somewhere entirely different. Like, you were like, oh, they're going to go to planet A, and they're like, no, we're going to planet B. Or they get through everything in planet A, and you're like, well, that was faster than I anticipated. Elf owls. There's some really cute birds. What was the question that I answered really well?
No.
Oh.
I'm assuming the video about rotating your owls answers the question really well about owl necks.
Cool. So they can do this. So owl bears. They're well designed.
Glad we've sorted that.
It's important. So this was something that you kind of ran into in Spikadelic, which is that we kind of got to the end of the material that
I had time to plan.
That you'd had time to plan. Regardless, like we've talked about the taking more time to plan, but we reached the end of that. And what did you end up doing in that situation?
Improvising everything.
But what was part of that process?
Eventually we did end up just saying, no, I think that this is a good spot to, all right, yeah, let's end it here. Well, I panicked and called break. No. We did talk about it briefly over a break because it is a show. And I'm trying to remember, and it was a while ago.
But no, we talked about it at the break.
Then. Yeah, we talked about it at the break. Got in vague terms, like we didn't discuss specifics, but initially, and I changed where the McGovern was. My intent had been that the Avon agents had been getting away with it in the car that you were pursuing, but then I realized that didn't make a very good story. So, over break I thought about it and planned out loosely some more and realized, like, that wouldn't make a great story, but what would is if it had been a decoy that you all bit onto and fell for. And that part you didn't know about, I don't think. So we dove back in and finished up the fight, I think was where we were at that point. And it ended up taking longer than expected.
Well, there was a lot of thighs involved.
Yes, there were a lot of thighs involved. Hey, Arden. And no, it was not a MacGuffin. Not a MacGuffin. A McOven. McGovern.
It was a gun oven.
Yeah.
A govern.
Yeah, it was a McGovern. But it was, yeah. No, it's fine. Anyway.
Totally different than a MacGuffin.
Mm-hmm. Spelled completely differently. Yeah. So,
I feel like a lot of people here don't know how to spell oven.
Yeah. So, yeah, we just kind of wung it.
You wung it? Sort of
winging it. No, we definitely didn't wang it. This isn't Spikadelic. But we are talking about this, so maybe we did wang it. So that was basically setting you up with the situation where you were going to have to retrace what you had done and go back to the beginning because you had assessed the wrong information, and then I decided that you would get more info there, but then by the time we got back there I was like, actually this is probably a good place to wrap up and go at it again later.
So that's an excellent example of wanging it. Of winging it, of improvising.
Next Spikadelic, tune in as we chung it.
and then wang it.
Then we will have wang
chung it. No, I got that where that was
making
going.
Sure.
It did not fly over my head. Cut that square in the face. So improvise
like an agent of Groove's crotch.
That's where I want them all. It's the best place for them. So I recognize saying this statement is like, that's super not helpful. Just improvise. Because that's a big concept. Like, just make it up. Just improvise it. And that's not actually a particularly helpful statement unless that's something that you're familiar with or comfortable with or have experience with. And lots of things can give you that experience. I do genuinely recommend people taking improv classes or having actual improv theater experience because it's very related to RPGs. But in the example of... you're like, wow, they got through this material faster. They got up to the point that I had planned to, and I don't really have the next idea. Like, you have typically as a GM, and one of the things you can kind of rely on is that you often have these like little plot nuggets. You've got like a something kind of pitched. You have a direction, a goal, and yours was the McGovern, and that Avalon had it in some capacity. Avalon, Avon.
Yeah.
Have it in some capacity.
The Avon ladies.
Yeah,
working for grandma.
Yeah. You have to be an Avon lady before you can become
Really,
a grandma.
it's a good show.
It's delightful. I don't. Oh goodness. It's a delightful show. So you have this kind of pitch forward nugget. So one of the things I do recommend kind of keeping in your mind, whether or written down in some way, is a longer term goal. And yeah, plot bunnies.
Which now makes me want to going back to your earlier phrase of kill your darlings. Mm-hmm. Now it's kill your bunnies.
Kill your bunnies.
It totally works because bunnies are so freaking cute.
Keep
But
them. But they're also delicious.
Kinda.
Apparently they're a very good source of meat because they reproduce really quickly, and so they don't take a lot of energy.
So, you know that I grew up on a farm, but a lot of the viewers may not. I grew up on a farm. We raised bunnies at one point.
Nom-nom bunnies?
Yeah.
I'm going to call them nom-nom.
So, kill your bunnies.
Get too attached to a plot point, bop it on the head.
Yeah. There you go. See? It works. That's what I'm saying. And it doesn't offend as many people?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
So you have your plot nugget, the kind of that long-term goal, and so one of the recommendations I do have for people, and this involves some amount of planning on your part, is having a longer-term goal, which a long-term is subjective, and it can be it should reach beyond at least one session, probably more than one session, because otherwise if it doesn't reach beyond what you would anticipate being one session, it's not going to help you with improvising. But having some place where the story's going to go, which is getting this device from Avon in order to save the world. Because that's the conclusion of the story, and once we wrap that part up, then the story's done, and then the episode would probably end.
Yeah.
In Leviathan, it's, saving the galaxy with my specific caveats and designs. And that gives you, that's essentially your suggestion when you're improvising, or one of your suggestions when you're improvising. And so you can use that to help direct yourself into something that is a relevant challenge or a relevant encounter.
There's just all manner of conversation about eating bunnies.
About eating bunnies, yeah. That's right. My parents, by my parents I mean my dad, whenever we would have rabbit, normally at a restaurant, he would just be like, thumper. In fairness, if we had deer, it was, Bambi. And I'm just like, you're really helping with this.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. So anyway.
So, sorry, I didn't realize the amount of fat content on a rabbit. I'm pretty sure there's also a difference though between like rabbits bred for meat versus wild rabbits.
Yeah. Yeah, but still. Second most reliable source. Aww.
Okay. I was gonna talk a little bit more. So how do you improvise? That's a big question. You just do it. Not helpful.
I mean, it kind of is. Like,
yeah, I mean,
you just keep going.
You say something. Is typically the first part. You say something, but some of the constraints you can use. So a lot of systems have baked into them random encounter tables or kind of the equivalents to that. And D&D is great for it. It's got resources galore for literally generating an encounter on the fly. And so you can go that route. You can 100% randomize it. You can also kind of do a variation on that, which is normally, which is also a good strategy, where you can basically say like, oh, I want something that feels a little combat-y. I want to an animal fight because like they're wandering for the woods and they're being super loud and noisy. And so then you can go and you can just look at the ones that are animal fights and you can pull from there. In a less rules-oriented system, or a system with like less crunchy stats for your monsters or your NPCs, you might find that you can just be like, they're going to face a monster and then kind of describe it. And sort of like one of the ways that I try and describe aliens is I basically kind of go down a list of, I'm like, well, what sort of like, are they reptile, mammalian, like do they have, what sort of extra feature do they have? And a lot of that's inspired by, there's a table in Stars Without Number that just helps you randomly generate aliens.
Ooh.
And there's also one for monsters, and so I kind of look at those and I'm like, what haven't I done recently?
For no reason whatsoever, I might need to see that at some point.
I think it's in here. It might not be, but they have a monster table.
Not the monster one, the alien one.
No reason whatsoever.
No, none at all. None at all.
I don't think I printed that one out.
It's not like...
But I'll show it to you. So, but like,
it's good. It's fine.
There's a beast table as well that you can use to generate it.
I'll just look it up.
For example, this is my tables. They are tables that I pulled from the Stars Without Number rulebook, and they are like general NPC types: peaceful human, martial human, veteran fighter, elite fighter, heroic fighter. And they give me a stat block which gives me everything that I need. And so I'll be like, okay, the players have gone this direction. They are in a slum on a backwater planet. Okay, gang member, here are their stats. And I will then reskin the gang member, and then suddenly we've got chartreuse serpents. But we have...
None whatsoever, Arden. No.
No future shows involving aliens.
No. Definitely not.
But this is also a good example.
Or needing to do trill spots. No, none of that.
There is absolutely no reason why you can't take resources from a system like Stars Without Number for their random generation tables, because that system is designed for it. That system is designed for you to have to create an entire star system, and that's one of the things that it's really good at. So, like, it also has ways to randomly generate planets, and it has ways to randomly generate alien species and what sort of values they have and what sort of types of races they are. So don't just limit yourself to the encounter resources that you have from one system.
Val Viper, I haven't kept up with news. What are they definitely not referencing?
Good work.
Oh, goodness.
So, yeah, there's no reason why you can't take inspiration from a system and bring it into yours. And you know, like, the NPC tables aren't going to be helpful to you. But the random generation tables for planets and aliens, whether you use them in a game or you just have them as part of your planning, super great resources to have.
Yep.
And random tables are also sometimes just useful to have as inspiration. So I do occasionally like to just have like a page of just sort of ideas on it.
I mean, yeah, that's in a lot of ways that's what a random table is. It's a list of ideas. So you can reference it in whatever way is meaningful at the time, is useful at the time, whether it's by being like, no, I really don't care, and rolling it, or being like, yeah, that's gonna work.
And even within those, you can also then say, well, I've kind of used this one before, but I'm gonna take this part of it, and I like this piece, or you know, you can do the roll and like, oh, I don't like that, and then the re-roll, or whatever it is. So having one of the things I do recommend having is some resources to give you ideas and inspirations. And they should be resources kind of focused on whatever you have the hardest time with. Because there's no point making random encounter tables if you don't use them. Or you're like, I'm super confident, I'll always come up with an idea for an animal. But like, I'm terrible at names, so I need name tables. I just do. Yeah. It takes the stress off of me, but I'm pretty comfortable at coming up with challenges for players because either I can pull back on previous ones or I can take enough, like, there will be some people there. Okay, what type of people will be there? I look at the table of the NPCs and I pick one of them. And so that works for me. But building your own kind of collection of resources from systems, from experiences, is something that will help a lot with improvising and taking some of that burden off of you. Names are really hard for me.
They can be very, very difficult. Because especially when you're on the spot on camera, like when you go to reach for names, and this is something that will resonate with you, I'm sure, you're going to go for names that are familiar to you, which means that you are choosing someone else's name.
Yep.
Like, those are the names that are going to come to your head first, universally.
Mm-hmm. The worst part was
unless you have pre-prepared names.
The trap I fall into is I'm like, cool, I'm gonna like base it off of I'll pick a name of someone I know, because it's a name, it's a real one, and it exists. And then I'll be like, but I'm gonna give them a different part of the name. So I'll be like, I have a friend and her name is Emma. And I was like, Emma, I'm not gonna use her last name because that would be weird. And then the first name that pops into my head is another Emma that everyone knows of, Emma Thompson. And then you have Emma Thompson in a game. Or I do the same thing with a Natalie. And that even worse when you're like, Natalie Dormer, no, that's a famous person. Can't do that. Portman. Fuck.
See, yeah. My thinking is like knowing that I would immediately be going towards like celebrity names would definitely be like trying to take. I think the best way to do it would be grabbing, if you're talking about a female character that you need a name for, grabbing a female name and a male celebrity's last name.
That would be smart. That's a solid strategy.
Because then like it'll at least minimize the instances of overlap.
That's a solid way to go with it. I do a lot of that style, like planning names when I'm planning is fine, because I do things like I'll look up words in other languages that mean something that I think is relevant, and then I'll like switch letters around, or I do a lot, like that's easy because I'm planning. I have resources. I don't have to come up with it on the fly, but when I'm pulling it out of my ass, it's been a little easier with sci-fi because names can be made up of just sounds.
Someday, this is goals for the studio. Someday I would like to have the GM stand be a little bit more mini control center or command center. For those of you that don't know, my command center is like a series of monitors where I run the show from.
It's pretty intense.
And I would like eventually the GM's table to be a miniature version of that, so that you don't just have the little tablet available that's running everything for you, and so you really only have that one tiny screen to work with, but that you would have a small series of screens, so that you've got Sirenscape on one, and you've got the donations ready to be read when you were ready on another, and then you've got like apps, for example, that would allow you to roll a random name for whatever your show is, or whatever my show is, or whatever whoever's show is. Having different applications that are specific to what we do, different things that would facilitate
like dice
the shows
apps,
that we do.
For those occasional times when you're like, I need a D1000 for some reason.
Yeah, some random.
Yeah.
Yep.
Some randomizers.
Things like that, but I mean that requires a lot of back end stuff. So that's just the dream, not the
dream
plan.
I'm glad you can do that style. I cannot do that on the fly. I like it works better when it's fantasy or sci-fi because I can kind of, but like cyberpunk it didn't work well for. I felt like people's names needed to be less random letters and sounds and more actual names or words.
Yeah.
I think, do you have any other thoughts or things that you've seen people do in terms of creating things on the fly for an encounter, or questions you have about doing that? Before we can touch on balancing.
No, I think I'm pretty good. I agree with what you've said, that that improv experience is ridiculously helpful. I don't actually have any, aside from having watched you all do a lot of really good RPG shows, and I like to think that I've picked up a fair amount that way, but there is still a lot of value in actually taking improv class, even though it's terrifying.
Well, you know some of the teachers though.
It's still terrifying.
Fair.
I mean, if it's no, I was gonna say if it's like private lesson, no, still terrifying.
That's reasonable.
That's still terrifying.
Yeah, I think finding your balance as an individual between having resources available and being comfortable with improvising, and that might change over time. Like, I had way more tables for Shadowrun. I did a lot more planning, made a lot more stat blocks in the first half of the show than in the second half. By the second half, I was like, I know what average dice pools are. I'm so comfortable with this that I would just pick up dice and just be consistent in the number of dice that I picked up. Because I'm like, this NPC is doing 3 things. They're shooting, they are defending, they are soaking damage. And I just need those 3 dice pools. But that's a difference. Like, when I started, I had random tables in case I needed a guard offhand, but then I would also create like four different things for each session. And so even when the player, and that was where I would use a lot of like, well, the players went in a different direction, but I still have this guard stat block so I can move him around to somewhere else. Yeah. Watching the World Cup is a good way to pick up names. So the last piece I kind of wanted to touch on today about doing things on the fly is specifically to balancing things, and often these are connected, because you will be like, I'm gonna pull a stat block for D&D, and like you're like, this challenge rating should be fine, but you might be wrong. Challenge ratings are an interesting, and they talk about it in D&D, and like sometimes you don't always pay attention to it, or you might forget. They're based off of the party being fresh. So, and meaning like full spell slots, full health, full equipment, and all of those things. And so if you're planning, say, a dungeon crawl, even on its simplest, and they're facing the encounter after like having fallen down a cliff and maybe had a rock fall, and so they're coming to you and they've used spells and they don't have health, that challenge rating may suddenly become higher than you anticipated because you didn't plan it for whatever reason to happen when the players weren't fresh. So what do you do in that situation? There's bajillion options and none of them are wrong. You can just go with it and be like, fuck it, this is a hard encounter and they're going to deal with it. And you can roll everything as it is. You can keep all of the damage as it is. You can do absolutely nothing, and that is a legitimate choice, and it may fit with the tone of your game. You can own up to it in some capacity and say, like, this monster is now suddenly different. You can switch out the stat block, and you can just start doing things that
Could
way.
have it be wounded as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe it's not fresh. Like, that's also an excellent example, and that can be a reason. So there's a lot of things that you can do, like, and this is specific to D&D, messing with its hit points. I often will choose to not use certain abilities because, like, they're very powerful abilities, and so I'm only going to use them once. Even if it is a recharge, maybe I'll just never recharge it. So, like, they still get to, like, face the incredibly powerful ability, but I don't use it every turn.
Yeah.
Or I don't use it as frequently as I could do. And recharge may not be a thing in 5th edition. I don't remember. That was the thing in 4th, is that, like, you would have, like, powerful abilities that would recharge. On the flip side, maybe you made it too easy because the previous challenges they rolled really well on, and so now they're actually fresh, and you were like, oh, maybe they're going to be wounded by the time they get to us. So on the flip side, maybe it has more hit points. Maybe it has a buddy. Sometimes having...
Who's late to the party.
That's late to the party, like it shows up slightly later.
Healing potion.
If it's some sort of creature that it would make sense for,
creature,
it has a healing potion that it can pop.
Yeah.
You can always go like full on Final Fantasy, and it's not its final form. And suddenly it sprouts wings, and you pull out a new stat block, and you're actually weren't facing off a ghoul, you were facing against a lich. I don't know, that's probably a dramatic upscale, but So there are a lot of options. Sometimes one of the other choices that I will do is I will make my NPCs dumb, and that can sound weird, but especially like if they're generic guards, If they were smart, they would, in Shadowrun is a good example, they would geek the mage. But I know my mage is squishy, and I'm like, I just hit my mage a lot, and like they're running low on hit points, or they haven't gotten to do anything, or whatever it is. I will decide that my NPC is going to target the tank. And that's a dumb choice, because the NPC should be smart and should know to target the mage, but they're actually going to target Cromwell, who can soak all of the damage. And that was a decision that I would frequently make, is that I have them play dumb. Unless they're a very important NPC that I really want the players to feel scared of, as opposed to a different type of challenge. So you can make, like, remember your NPCs, the NPCs don't team up, so they're not focusing fire, which is a common strategy that will help things make it easier. I've learned this from Battletech. Those fucking AIs focus fire so much.
Yes, you want to focus fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Focusing fire. But if you feel like that's having a negative impact on the game, then you don't focus fire. So you can make the NPCs make less optimal decisions than they might otherwise make. That is a common strategy that I will go for. There is, and then I will bring this up because it has come up a lot on Twitter, fudging dice rolls. What does that mean? Well,
we've come to this.
I needed to bring it up.
Yeah.
This is something that's important because it depends often on how you view the role of the GM and the importance of the rules within your game. And hopefully this is a conversation that you have had as a group and that you've established some norms over. And this can range from everything from it's interesting because this covers both success and failure, but also if you're rolling for damage, it can cover damage. So you might decide that you're going to fudge the damage roll because you're like, oh shit, I rolled a 12 on this D12 and I know that they don't have the hit points for it.
Because you don't want to actually geek the mage.
Mm-hmm. That's your choice, and that is a difference of opinion. I don't personally have a problem with it. I also actually don't personally have a problem with players doing it. I can't see my players' rolls, and my players can't see mine because they're too far away from me. I have no idea. They could be lying through their teeth. D12, not in Shadowrun, but in Stars of That Number, I roll D12 sometimes. I may not actually deal 12 points of damage. The other thing that I actually do, and this feeds into me being very lazy at math, is I just don't necessarily fudge the rolls, but I'll fudge all the modifiers. I'll be like, it's an adding 5 this time instead of adding 4, which is probably what I'm supposed to be adding. So I will sometimes just guess what the modifier is and do whatever the easier math is. So I'm like, oh, I rolled a 17. You know what's way easier to do? 3 to 20 than 22? So I'm really lazy when it comes to doing math at the table. So I will go with whatever seems the quickest number that came into my head after I roll. I'm like, that sounds really weird, but I'm like, I roll a 14, and I'm like, I don't remember the modifier for this one. Was it 5 or was it 4? It's 14 plus 5 is 19. Did that hit? The number is high. I bet it works. Also a reasonable choice to make.
Yeah.
But not always the right choice for your group, and that's why it's important to have a conversation about how they feel about decision making at the table. Yeah. There are questions of trust that goes into these things, and I've been lucky that I've built up what's felt like a pretty good amount of trust with the players that I've had at my table.
And I feel like that's a lot of what it comes down to, is in particular when you're at a home game, there's, I feel, a lot more of the power fantasy elements of RPGs come out in home games more than they do streamed games. Mm-hmm. So people are more apt to fudge the rolls because they want to feel powerful. Mm-hmm. And that isn't what we're talking about, really. We're talking about mostly streamed RPGs, or at least playing with people who mostly do streamed RPGs, where it is much more about the story. And that's why what I was saying is I love systems mm-hmm. like the drama points in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or momentum and threat in Modiphius's mm-hmm. Star Trek Adventures RPG, that allow you to say, this role is important to me and I want it to succeed. It gives you a way within the mechanics to make that choice rather than fudging the roles or cheating or whatever you want to call it. Like, it builds in a mechanic for that, and I think more systems should have that, because then you don't even need to have this conversation of whether or not it's okay to fudge the rules. But it all comes down to communicate with each other.
It's a collaborative experience.
If everybody is at that table is agreed that it's okay to occasionally fudge the rules, or I don't think anybody's going to say
tends to happen more is less fudging the rules and more fudging the math.
Yeah.
Is my suspicion, and I say that I know as someone who is very sloppy when she does her mental math. I am not accurate with it because sometimes I'm confident that my modifier has changed. I don't care enough if I'm off by 1 or 2, so I'm guessing. I'm guessing that's actually probably what happens a lot more in people's groups. But yeah, I think I agree. I like systems like that, and a lot of them have that, and some of them don't.
But I think it all comes down to what kind of experience everyone at the table wants to have. And we have the luxury, both of us, of having an incredible group of friends to pull like this amazing pool of people to game with when we do game, that it makes it very easy for us to have those conversations and find groups that we have compatibility with in that way. And that's not always easy for everyone, but it's about coming to a consensus about it one way or the other.
And I want to point out, like, my game, I roll against the players. I try and reduce the amount of time I roll. Like, it's mostly only in combat. But the, Eat, Pray, Kill, stuff never rolls. Like, the concept of Powered by the Apocalypse games is that the GM, the narrator, the storyteller, I'm not sure what it's referenced in that game, is never rolling. They only react to what the players do, or things just happen. And that was a really interesting experience. When I ran a game in that type of system, it was just like, oh, things just happen. They just do. I just say it happens and it happens. Yeah. And that's a whole different kind of power that you have. So knowing what the kind of power you have is and what sort of way you want to wield it is important. But I will say there are situations where if you feel like you misjudge the difficulty of an encounter, in some capacity, whatever that means, one of the tools you do have at your disposal is to change the numbers. And that might be the randomized numbers, that might be the static numbers, whatever they are, and whatever thing you think it is going to be most consistent. And that's not really a wrong or a right thing to do, and I don't like people who are preachy about it. But in general, I don't like people who are preachy about anything with RPGs. Like, you have to do it this way. There's the one true way. And I'm like, nope. Go shove a stick up your... I have feelings.
There is no one true way. Yeah. Except the way that is in your heart.
Yeah.
But don't put that on other people.
Yeah. And there's also nothing wrong with, like I said, you misjudge an encounter and you're like, fuck it, this is the encounter that they're facing. Yeah. Like, that's how it's going to go down. Like, that's also a 100% legitimate choice to make.
Yeah. Questions?
Yeah, this is the good question segment. Thank you for letting me have that conversation. I hope it was painless.
We'll see.
An edge bonus system. Yeah, I've been interested because there is something like D&D has inspiration, and I feel like it's not used that often, and I think my challenge to myself if I ran another D&D game was actually probably be really liberal with inspiration and find a way, because that is kind of the functionally, I think it just gives player advantage on a roll. It basically allows a reroll, and I'm like, that's not necessarily that game breaking.
But it also doesn't necessarily give, for me at least, it wouldn't necessarily give me what I wanted out of the mechanic.
True.
The drama point system of... And I really do not think that the system behind Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a good system. It isn't at all. However, the idea of drama points especially the way that you guys were originally doing them, where you make the roll and then you decide to use a drama point to increase it a massive amount, thereby making it successful. That is the mechanic that I like. Knowing after the fact, realizing it's so easy to make a roll and then realize that that roll was important to you, and now that you're not going to succeed at it, you're realizing how important it was. What can you do about it? Spend a drama point and it's going to bump it over into a success, or if not, spend 2 and it sure as heck will. That gives you the opportunity to as a player say, this particular point of the plot is important to me and my character. I want it to happen this way. And to a degree, the Star Trek Adventures with the momentum and threat, you can do elements of that, and it's not quite the same, but it has enough of that I hear echoes of it in there. In very good ways. So, yeah, I really like a mechanic like that, whereas inspiration, you're still rolling another die. You're still not sure that it's going to succeed.
It is still very randomized.
And then Edge in Shadowrun is just, it's too valuable.
Oh,
you
God,
get
it's so expensive. Because you don't give people Edge as the GM. They buy it.
And to be clear, this sort of thing lends itself very well to the narrative experience, to the storytelling experience, more so than to a hack/slash campaign.
Yeah.
But that's my world, as we discussed at the beginning. That's the kind of RPG I've always wanted to be playing. So that's my world.
Yeah, and I've seen different variations on it in different games. Like the closest kind of that I kind of did with it in Stars Without Number is that if players fail on a roll, they do not succeed on the DC, they can ask if they can succeed with a consequence. And that's an alternative that I found, because sometimes it is important. They're like, no, I really want this thing to happen. And I'm like, it happens. Yep. Something not so great happens as well.
And with Star Trek Adventures, there's that mechanic as well, where I think you can give the GM threat, which is basically their version of momentum or drama points or whatever. You can give them threat to succeed. And they can use it to form a complication, or hopefully I didn't just reiterate what you just said.
No. That's a different example of a similar concept.
Doing a bunch of different things at once,
So, questions people have.
Excellent. We should have air conditioning by Leviathan tonight.
Success!
So, we just need to wrap up the show and then they'll put the hole in.
Yes, Goose, actually, over on my Patreon, they're open to everyone, but I wrote up the rules. It's patreon.com/randomtuesday. I wrote up all of the homebrew rules that I did for the system. So you can find those if you have an interest in it. It includes the homebrews that I did for like hit points, because I wanted to make the system less lethal, and a couple of the tweaks that I did to change the way DCs work in the game. So like the biggest change that I did is it's a flat. They always, because it's 2d6, they always want to get 10. If they get below 10, they can succeed with a consequence. If they get above 10, they automatically succeed. And I base that off of Powered by the Apocalypse, which uses a similar sort of success, partial success. But I wanted it to be in the player's hand, as opposed to Powered by the Apocalypse. If you roll...
I was wrong.
Oh. We won't have it tonight. If you roll 7 to 10, it's a partial success, and below a 7, it's a failure. How do you approach modifying an established system? My approach so far has been I play the system and figure out what I don't like about it, and then think about what would make me like it. And sometimes I know off the bat, like I looked at Stars Without Number and I'm like, I don't want any players to only have 1 hit point. I just don't. It's not a thing that I want. So I homebrewed that they could have more than 1 hit point. And in that case, I literally liberally stole it from another D20 system that many people are familiar with, known as Dungeons & Dragons. And D&D gives players hit dice based on their class, and I was like, cool, this one, and this one. So I picked 3 classes that seemed similar to the 3 classes that they have in Stars Without Number. So a lot of it comes through playing a system and being like, I really didn't like this. The experience of this was bad, or feedback from the players. And I found in that system, judging difficulty challenges was really loosey-goosey in a way that wasn't, like, good loosey-goosey. Because, like, to figure out how difficult a hack is, there's 2 tables. I think it's 2 tables. There's 1 table. I don't know. And there's a lot of pluses and minuses. And, like, if this is, then this, it's +2. But then this is +1. And I'd just be like, I don't want to sit there and have to calculate how difficult this is because fuck the elites to hack everything. So I just started setting the number. And I was like, easy, medium, hard. And then I just found I was tired of them failing. So, because there's no mechanic for, like, what happens when they fail, and it puts a lot on me, and I'm like, sometimes I do want them to succeed, but I also want to be able to make shit happen, so I'm just gonna say that happens now.
Paladin Hulk Lucy Gousset. It's Lucy Gousset, and that's a character in Spikadelic. It's on the list. Just saying.
Currently I don't give bonuses based on wigs. I think that would give unfair advantages.
Well, you were saying you were tired of it failing, so, you know, maybe.
Gousset.
Yeah.
It's just the pronunciation.
Yeah. Gousset.
Gousset is a silent Y.
Yeah.
Gousset.
Oh, goodness. Do we have any more questions?
You don't have to have questions.
Yeah.
Gousset. There you go.
I don't know. Check the spreadsheet. It's on there.
Is it spelled Lucy, or is it spelled Lsey?
I don't know.
How do you not hold all this information in your head?
Because I'm holding way too much other information in my head.
3 agents, Duck, Duck, and Goose.
We also have the
There's
Paulies.
the Duck Duck brothers, and then Lucy Gousset.
Yeah. And the Paulies.
The Paulies?
Yeah, there's a Paulie gang.
The Paulies.
Yeah, they're all Paulies.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
it's good.
It does sound like a fun law firm.
Yeah.
I never ever want to get Goose as my lawyer, though.
Yeah.
He just leaves the room every time you get in there.
Oh.
Hey, Goose. He just walks away.
I was thinking more along the lines of he's always sexually harassing his own clients, but
Oh, I did not go that direction.
Goose, yeah. Grabbing the bum, that's a goosing someone.
I did not know that.
That's
I was
grabbing
thinking
them.
of the children's game,
Yeah.
in which no butts are grabbed.
Well, no, because that's Duck Duck Goose. This is just Goose
Oh.
by themselves. It's not somewhere we should go.
No.
Anyway, right.
That's cool. We have no other questions.
Yeah.
I talked a lot.
So I think if there aren't more questions, then we'll probably wrap up a couple minutes early because I really need to pee.
That's very reasonable.
And it's really, really hot in here, and apparently we're not going to have air conditioning tonight, so I need to work on that. So, yeah, well, Captain Sardonic, we got put into the Spikadelic mindset, and it's difficult to...
It happens.
Yeah. You know, when you're dealing with agents of groove, it's really hard to get that turned off.
Get out of that groove.
Turned off?
Yeah. No.
No.
Yeah, it's good.
Right.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Stick around. Well, maybe not here for the next 3 hours, but in 3 hours, we will be returning with Leviathan Distant Stars, episode 4 of season 3.
I'm excited it's coming back.
Things are happening. They may be taking
That's
a
true.
one-way trip.
Uh-oh. Dun dun.
Dun dun dun! So join us while we... no, maybe there's going to be a malfunction on the ship involving the heating.
That could work.
Surin's actually a lot older and is now going through menopause. Having a hot flash. We'll see you guys in about 3 hours. Follow us on the social medias. Thank you for all of the donations. Have a wonderful